Morning, everyone. Morning. If we could just quiet down, we're going to get going. Thanks very much. We have quorum, and I'd like to call the 10th meeting of the Budget Committee to order. I'd like to welcome all members of the committee and members of council and, of course, members of the public and the media. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the land we are meeting on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So, this is a special meeting of the Budget Committee. Today we are excited to launch the 2020 rate-supported budgets. You can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live or follow the meeting on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. At this time, I'd like to ask if there's any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none, we will continue. We have one item on the agenda today, and that is the 2020 rate-supported budget launch. City officials will start by giving us some presentations on the staff-recommended 2020 operating budget and the 2020-2029 capital budget and plan for Toronto Water and Solid Waste Management Services. You have the presentations distributed in front of you, and the materials are now, as of 9:30, a few minutes ago, available on the clerk's website. The review of the 2020 rate-supported budgets will be considered at our regular Budget Committee meeting on Tuesday, November 25th. The agenda for that meeting was, as I mentioned, published a few moments ago this morning, and it includes the staff-recommended budgets for the rate-supported programs. Public presentations and deputations on the 2020 rate-supported budgets will also be heard on that meeting on November 25th. And just to remind my colleagues, the purpose of our meeting, this special meeting this morning, is to actually introduce the rate-supported budgets to the committee and to the public. We'll be taking the time here to receive that information, receive the presentations, understand it and digest it. The opportunity to act on that information will be, as is always the case, the November 25th meeting, as in previous years, and we'll hold all motions and actions until the November 25th meeting. We will have time to ask questions and clarify at the conclusion of each presentation. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to, I think, Toronto Water, who is going to start us off today, and we'll hear from staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'm going to walk you through the 2020 and, as you mentioned, the 10-year capital plan for Toronto Water. We'll get into the overview and highlights, but before we do, we just go through a quick review of what we do in Toronto Water. We're one of the largest utilities in North America. We operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do serve over 3.6 million residents, and that comprises the city proper as well as the southern part of York region and a small part of Peel region for wastewater. With respect to the programs that we operate, we've defined them into three broad buckets: essentially water treatment and supply, wastewater collection and treatment, and stormwater management. If we look at our projected production volumes for next year, we will be producing greater than 438 billion liters of potable water during the year, and then maintaining over 6,100 kilometers of water mains and trunk water mains, transmission mains. In addition, we then receive back about 400 billion, and the reason there's a big difference is because we don't receive the sewage back from York region. We provide them the potable water, but not the sewage. They treat that in a different location. But that 400 billion liters does include some stormwater that we have to manage because it's mixed with our combined sewers. And so we maintain over 5,100 kilometers of sanitary and combined sewers. So in the older part of the city, we still have combined sewers. And then our stormwater, we are making significant investments in improving our stormwater management systems throughout the city. So some of the key issues and risks that we face, one big emerging issue that we're starting to see is planning for growth. We have been growing as a city for many years, but the pace and intensity of growth is accelerating, and we're seeing it concentrated in key areas. And that's putting some pressures on the infrastructure, particularly in downtown core and midtown Toronto areas. Another thing that we're seeing with redevelopment is issues with groundwater and groundwater management. As some sites are going into areas where we have high water tables, and as we're building higher buildings, we're building deeper parking garages. And our sewers are designed to handle some groundwater, but not the volumes that are being experienced at some sites. So that's been a challenge to manage. Another issue dealing with growth is that the way we have our development charges structured right now with some exemptions, there is a shortfall in the 10-year plan of about $483 million that has to be drawn from the Toronto Water Capital Reserve in order to fund growth-related projects. Basement flooding is another big issue. There's a lot of work going on. We've accelerated that program, and I'll speak to that in the presentation of how we've accelerated the environmental assessments and how we're ramping up our capital contributions over the 10-year program. So it's going to be a challenge managing all that work out in the neighborhoods and managing those environmental assessments. Modernization is an issue that is hitting us now as we made significant investments in technology over the last 20 years to get efficiencies. Well, some of the suites of that technology are starting to age, and we're going to have to replace that. And then, of course, managing our financial system, our reserve balances in order to drive our state of good repair program, our aging infrastructure issue. So those are the bigger challenges. How we're addressing them? Well, on the growth side, we do have a number of studies that we're working closely with planning and the development community to assess the infrastructure that's needed. With respect to the stormwater issues and basement flooding, on the resiliency side, significant increases in our capital plan that you will see that's projecting us to spend over the next 10 years. Just on the wet weather component, $3.87 billion. A big jump in funding for basement flooding. You'll see that in the presentation as well, taking it over $2 billion in the next 10 years, as well as investment in the Dawn and Central Waterfront project, which we've got earmarked $1.37 billion within this 10-year slot. We've got a number of key performance measures that we track. One of the indicators we're watching closely is the water main breaks per 100 kilometers, because we've been doing a lot of investment in our water mains over the last 10 years, and we're starting actually to see us come below our target levels. So we're tracking that closely, and we're hoping the long-term trend remains positive, that stays lower. When we get into the operating budget, before we get into the specific 2020 budget, I thought we would look backwards in time. And so we did analysis of the last 20 years. This council has made a commitment to raise rates significantly over that time period with the objective of putting that money into the capital program. This slide, this analysis shows that that objective was met. We essentially analyzed the operating costs, and these are actual costs. These are dollars spent for the last 19 years. If you take that red line, that's our operating cost component, and you average that increase out over that 19-year period, it's about an annual increase of about 1%. So that means if you take out inflation, we were actually able to lower costs over that time on a normalized basis. Where did all the rate increase go, all that additional money? It went into growing the capital program. As you could see, in 2001, it was just over $100 million. This year, we're planning to actually spend $890 million, with a plan of 2020 to spend over $1 billion. So if we get into the recommended operating budget, between our three program areas that I referenced, if we just look at the total gross numbers, the recommended budget would have revenues generating of $1.39 billion and the corresponding expenses matching. And I'll get into the specifics with this slide here. So that $1.39 billion will be allocated, 66% of it going towards the capital program. That will go directly to our capital reserve, and the remaining portion will then fund the operating costs of our program. Where does the money come from? The bulk of the money comes from water users. It comes through the water meters that we've installed. So 92% of the revenue generated from meters. In addition, there are some other revenue streams with our user fees, and we do have some grants that have been committed by the federal government, as well as some monies from York Region and transfers from capital. If we then just look at the operating component, so that slide I showed you, the $1.39 billion, if we take out the capital contribution, that 66%, that leaves us the operating pie of $469 million. Where is that money spent? Just under 40% is spent on salaries and benefits. That's a little bit different than some other divisions that you might see in the coming few months, where it's heavily dependent on salary dollars. We're more of an industrial type division, and we procure and buy a lot of goods and services and have to pay for utilities. So there are large expenditures. For example, our hydro electricity consumption is about $60 million a year. And so we have to deal with the vagaries of inflation and other rate increases within our budget. So if we look at some of the key cost drivers in the base budget, if you look at the services and rent line item, you'll see a big jump in that item. The big driver in that component really is the transferring of the utility cut program. We started changing that program from transportation, implementing that to Toronto Water, implementing the repairs to their cuts last year. So we put some money into the budget in 2019, and we said the council would take us about 3 years to do that official transfer over. And so this is the second phase where we're adding additional monies into Toronto Water as we slowly ramp up and deal with the utility cuts that Toronto Water are making right now. There is a third phase which will happen next year, and you'll see that in the outlooks. If we go to the, I don't know if we have it here, but you'll see it in the analyst notes. We're projecting that driver will still be there. And over time, that's coming out of our IDCs that we used to give to transportation. So it is just a realigning of services, but we have to put it in our operating budget. In addition, you'll see materials and supplies being higher. The inflation rate for Toronto Water is slightly higher than you'll typically see from the corporate side, because we have to deal with the fact that we buy other utilities like electricity, which that rate increase is well above inflation, as is natural gas. Now, those were the drivers that went up. We did find some savings and efficiencies as we went through budget work. If you look at this slide, our line-by-line review, we reduced some of our budget by over $5 million on the line-by-line review. We also, even though electricity rates are going up, we look closely at how we consume that electricity, and we found another $4.7 million in efficiencies in just how we use electricity. So there's a reduction there. And another item is a revenue increase. As part of Auditor General review that we had on the York Region agreement, we went back to York Region and negotiated an amendment to the agreement, which Council approved last year, and that will give us an additional $3.8 million in revenue. On the new and enhanced, we're coming forward and saying we need to reinvest in modernizing our technology. So we need to put in some resources to help us implement the changes we need to our technology platforms. And so the new and enhanced is asking for an additional 4 positions. Some of that will be funded from the capital program, and that's why you see a net of 108, while the gross is 394. And if you want to get into details, a lot of it is about managing our data. We generate a lot of data in Toronto Water, and we need to set up a better data warehouse because all of the trends in future are to use that data to work smarter and to provide customers with better data. We have to get organized to do that. In addition, we have to look at managing the cybersecurity issue. And then on top of that, this is another position which is trying to tie together two new enterprise systems. One is dealing with the work management system that's rolling out with several divisions, and the other one is the rollout of the new customer relationship management system with 311. We need a staff person to help us coordinate the rollout of those two large systems. Here are the 2021 and 2022 outlooks. If you look at the permanent surface restoration number, the 7.8 million on that slide, that's where I was talking about next year adding the final phase of the transfer of the permanent utility cut repair program. If we get into the capital budget, I won't dwell on this slide. This is the value, the book value, call it that, depreciated book value of our assets, broken down by the three program areas. And where does the money come from on funding the capital program? The bulk of it comes from our reserve, because we are a pay-as-you-go financing model right now. We draw from our capital reserve, and our plan is to fund the bulk of the program out of that reserve. But we do have some other reserves we can draw from, such as the development charge reserve, as well as a contribution from York Region as we expand infrastructure that services them. What will the capital plan buy you that we're presenting? Well, it's going to buy you, over the next 10 years, investments of $4.5 billion in water treatment and supply projects, $5.9 billion in wastewater treatment and collection projects, and $4.2 billion in stormwater management projects. The 10-year gross capital budget for Toronto Water now is projected to be just shy of $14.5 billion, and broken down into these various categories. Now, if we look at where the growth is going to happen over the next 10 years, what you'll see is the underground infrastructure, the sewers, the water mains, will continue to have heavy investment as we deal with our state of good repair backlog. The significant portion of our capital program will be to replace that infrastructure. There is a significant investment required in our wastewater treatment plants, and that's where you see the blue band at the bottom. The significant reinvestment occurring in Ashbridges Bay and Highland Creek treatment plant. You also see basement flooding. That's the gray band just underneath the gold band. That is jumping up significantly as we have some large projects coming through in basement flooding, and we've accelerated the environmental assessments. So as we complete those environmental assessments, we'll be able to move into construction. So we're going to grow the basement flooding program to fund over $200 million of projects for the next 3 or 4 years, and then hover just below $200 million over the remaining 10 years. And then you'll see the growth in that orange band. That's the stormwater management and the Don and Central waterfront projects that we have. Here's a breakdown, looking at it from a different lens. The bulk of the money will go to our State of Good Repair program. That will deal with our backlog. We also have significant reinvestments dealing with service improvements, and that's the basement flooding and the wet weather flow program. That's dealing with the inner harbor issues. As well, we have to manage our legislative and growth-related projects. So the total 10-year program of $14.48 billion, the bulk of the funding will come from our reserve. We are going to get some money from the federal government over that time period, about $100 million towards two projects dealing with stormwater management within the city. Now that is a big jump if you're looking at the capital program. And so the question is, can we get all that work done? So this year we're forecasting actually to be at a completion rate of 93%, so above our 85% target. We're planning to spend $890 million. This plan in front of you for 2020 is to take the gross program up to $1.2 billion. The target at 85% would be just over $1 billion, $1.035 billion. So we need to grow the program by about $145 million over what we spent this year. So the question is, can you do that? And so in this chart here, we did analysis, and if we look at what we have under signed contract, so not committed but signed, actual contract underway, 61% of the program is signed contract and work underway already. So that's just continuing on with multi-year projects. 21% of the program are the in-year projects we have, and that would be the water main relining, the smaller standalone water mains, and those are typically one-year projects, and we complete that set of projects relatively easily. Another 10% of our program funds third parties, so transfers to TRCA, et cetera. So that is cash out the door always. And then there's still another 6% that's in procurement. And we're tendering right about now. So we're quite confident that we will be able to hit the target of spending over $1 billion in 2020. And why? If we look at some specific projects, so this is the 2019 list of key projects we've been working on. Some very large ticket items that have been underway for quite some time. So the Don and Central Waterfront Phase 1, if we look at this chart here, that's essentially building a 10.5 kilometer tunnel along the lower Don. And that's the Phase 1 of dealing with the Inner Harbor issue we have. That project is let and construction's going. That is actually the shaft location at Ashbridges Bay. That's Lakeshore Boulevard. If you know the TTC car barn at Leslie, that's the shaft location right now. We're about to put a tunnel boring machine down there in a number of weeks. It's coming before Christmas. And we'll start the tunneling work. It'll head towards the city and follow that path. And so that work will be well underway. And so if you look at the 2019 year, we led about $500 million worth of $510 million worth of projects. For 2020, even though I mentioned that we have so much work already signed up, we're going to let another $555 million worth of projects. So that's the ones that are in progress. And some of those are tied together. And one of the things that we did, and it was tied to a report that we brought forward to council recently, was looking at could we accelerate the Don and Central Waterfront project. We have to find the financing for that. We need to find an additional $1.2 billion over that 10 years in order to get that work done. But what we have put in this budget is the engineering component, which is $25 million. So we've accelerated the engineering component, so at least we could start design work on that Inner Harbor while we keep looking at how we finance that project. The State of Good Repair funding, as I mentioned to you, is a key component of our program. And if we keep funding at the same levels, our backlog will continue to reduce. It has been reducing since 2009, and we will keep heading downwards with that backlog. If we get in now to the rate, so what we're recommending is a 3% increase. And no surprise, we've telecasted that many years in a row. And we need that money to grow that program, that capital program. But some of the things we have to look at when we do the modeling is consumption and population growth. So we always show you this slide, and our consumption still continues to go downwards, which is a good thing. That means people are being efficient in their use of water. The one thing that we do notice is the population, that slope, is starting to increase faster than we've seen in the past. And so that's something that we are trending, because when we look at this pattern shows you consumption each year over the months. So you could see the peak in the summertime. We always sell more water in the summer because it's hotter and people are watering the gardens. But what we do is we analyze the winter months, because that's when we should see a normal use of water based on the population. We're starting to see that that's climbing. And that could be a reflection that that population is going up. So even though we're becoming more efficient in the use of water, we might be hitting a point where the two lines are crossing. We don't believe we're there yet, but we're going to watch it very closely. We're going to report back next year if we think that's a longer-term trend. If we look at the impact of the water rate increases, we always show you this slide. So this line above here would be if people kept their consumption at the same steady rate of when we started increasing water rates, they would be paying at a much higher rate. But people have adjusted their consumption habits, have changed their appliances to higher efficiency, so they've blunted the effect of the water rate increases, which is a good thing again. They've been able to manage the impacts of the increases. If we look at how do we compare then with the 3% increase, we still remain very competitive with our local neighbors. Peel remains the lowest, even with the addition in Mississauga of a stormwater charge. We remain the second lowest. On the industrial side, we are still within the lower band, even with this increase. So what does the rate increase impact mean to the average household? It's $27 more a year. When you compare the total consumption, the average consumption, this is an interesting number. When we started the campaign, the average consumption per household was about 340 cubic meters a year. It's down to 230. So there's the effect of people using less water per household. So if you then look at what it costs an average household per day, we like to show you this number, per day for drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, that's the operating and all of the capital that we're doing, it's $2.57 per day for the average household. So we think that's great value for our residents. So the outlook plan, because we always have to show you how we fund that capital program, we've maintained the 3% increases over that time period as we have to manage that reserve balance so we don't bottom it out, because you could see in 2026 and 2027 we do start to get down to low numbers in the reserve as we complete some of the very large projects that we have. So that's our presentation, and happy to take some questions if you have.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions from committee? Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, okay, so I guess I'm going in page number order. Page 6.
Page 6?
Slide 6, yes. So, the issue of growth, that you spent some time on this. In terms of accommodating growth through your capital plan, you're already having to top up what you spend in development charges with draws on our reserve just to do growth projects. Have Toronto Water had a chance to do any kind of predictions of how you would have to accommodate any change that might come as a result of the Planning Act change, Bill 108? Or are you just waiting for the regs and later on we'll hear that we have to do something in our out years?
So we do actually need the details of the reg to know exactly the timing of when that cash might come in. And so the issue for us would be the fact that we have to put that infrastructure in the ground to match the growth, so to keep pace with that growth. If at this point in time we're collecting the development charges earlier, as we are now, and they get deferred, that we collect development charges later in that cycle, then that means we're going to have to either fund that capital project to a greater degree from reserve or borrow against it and then pay later when we get the money.
Right.
So it's going to change the way we have to finance growth, potentially, depending on the way the regs are structured.
Right, not just the quantum, but the timing will be a
So
problem.
the issue that I identified here is not the timing issue. This is one with respect to the exemptions that we have. Based on the type of development that's occurring and whether they pay development charges or not. So that's an issue because when we do that split, we're not getting the full cost of it. That sewer is taking flows from commercial buildings and residential buildings. It doesn't differentiate. It just takes all the flows. But the revenue streams are coming from residential primarily, as opposed to some of the commercial. But I have to pay the full cost of that sewer in order to deal with the growth.
Okay. Slide number 10. You've done a really good job with the operating costs over the years. And part of that is consumption's going
That's my team. They're great at what they do.
Yeah. But is it possible, could we make the case that the investment and the push on state of good repair actually has a positive impact on operating as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely, there's two, I'd say 2 or 3 key things that drive that efficiency within what you've seen in that slide. Investing in state of good repair is one of the big drivers, absolutely. As we replace out old equipment, it allows us to be more efficient. Just give you an example in our treatment plants, changing out an old pump or motor that used to use a lot of electricity. I put in new pumps, new motors, new drives. I could control how I run it, and I save a lot of electricity. That's just a simple example of how you do it.
Perfect. I'm going to use that. So, and one other question, page 15, the big, we're looking at the first phase now of transferring over the utility cut program to you. Now that you've done it for a year, so we're switching it over, which means we're switching over which revenue stream we're paying for that with, and that's relief on the property tax. But now that you've got a year or so of experience, have you evaluated whether or not your division, are you able to do them for the same unit cost? Is it costing you the same amount per project, per cut, as it was costing before when it was under Transpo?
So we are doing that analysis still, and what we saw was and we're comparing against the tenders because we're tendering and getting asphalt like everybody else is.
Yeah.
So we're checking against the unit rates and the variability on that, and right now we're seeing that it's about the same, if not the first round of contracts were slightly more. It's only because a lot of the asphalt companies weren't used to the new contracts that we structured. It's a faster delivery. It's a different approach. But we're quite confident as we roll in the broader program over the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be able to make refinements to that, and we'll be able to manage the unit rate costs.
Okay, great.
But it's still in transition. That's why we plan to do it over 3 years, because we knew there would be fluctuations. We have to set up the contractor base. We have to set up our own inspectors. So we're doing all that right now.
Okay, thanks.
Good. Councillor Nunziata, please.
Yes, thank you. So as far as the acceleration of EA for basement flooding, so the motion that we put forward at council last month tasked the province. So that is not part of that because we don't know what the answer is from the province. But when we do get that,
So-
would we see a lot of savings from that as well as far as the delays?
So, Mr. Chair, the motion that got moved is actually is helpful because what we accelerated was the timing of when we were going to do the studies and getting it out under contract. So now we have the whole city under contract. The motion that you put forward is actually changing the time period and some of the rules that of how to do the EA with the province. That will still help us. So we want to keep chasing that to see if we could shorten the time period required to complete those studies.
So we are going to be chasing the province.
Yes, we will. So that, and therefore, it'll be like a double acceleration. One
Sooner.
was getting more work out the door
Yeah.
and studying the whole city. And then if we can then change the rules how we do the EA, we save more time again.
Sooner rather than later.
Yes.
So as far as on page 16, the efficiencies and savings that you've been able to find, and also the Auditor General recommendations. So you've itemized the savings. Now, is that included in your budget that you've brought forward? Because
Yes, it is.
So
It's in the base budget reductions.
I know. So why then? I believe that I asked that last year. Is that when you bring your budget forward, your base budget, you have another line item showing the savings, so we actually see that the savings is built into your base budget?
So then it's a different type of analysis. If you're looking at like the savings, budget over budget and net, if that's what you're asking, I'm not sure. If you're asking that, you do that analysis. What we're presenting is actually a reduction of budget over budget of 1.5%. all of these numbers. But what we're showing you is the budget against actual, right? So that's what we've done, is we've reduced the budget amount from that basis.
Yeah, but you don't show a line, you don't show a separate line item that you deducted those savings from the actual.
Not on the presentation.
No, I know.
I'll have to see if
And
we
I
have
think
it in
that that's what I had asked for last year when we went through the budget, and not just for you, but for all the departments, so hopefully we'll see that. The increase, and I did bring that up. I know that, we started, what year did we start? When we had 12% and then we went 9. What year was that?
We never did it 12. We did, the first 9 was in 2006 budget.
Yeah, right. So when we started with those increases, and, in the past few years, we indicated and we communicated to our residents is the reason for the increase is that we want to put money into the capital on all this new infrastructure work that we're doing, and it's going basement flooding and so forth. Is there any way at one point that we can receive a summary from you, ward by ward, showing to our constituents, in fact, yes, we're increasing your water rates every year, start at 12, and it's 3, but this is what we have done in your particular area? Because I think it's important, because residents, when they hear they have an increase in water and they don't know where this is and what have you done with it? Nothing's been done in our area, so at one point I'd like to see that.
Sure. So,
now,
just a quick answer on that. We could do that. It'll take us some time because we have to go back and change our database to realign to the new wards. We built the database on the old
well, I
ward
think it's
structure,
important
so
that we get that,
possible to
because
do.
we have to justify the increase. Where is Hurricane Francis in this budget?
Hurricane Francis,
I think.
I will tell you
Tracy.
where it is, and
Because I don't see it.
you'll see it in the basement flooding briefing note. That's the package that was released to you. So as the chair mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, there's a series of documents that you'll receive. You'll receive the rate budget, companion reports, and every year we give you the basement flooding briefing note that shows the work that's underway over the next 5 years, as well as the EAs that are underway. You have a big EA
I just want to
meeting
make
in
sure
your ward
Hurricane
coming.
Francis is included in that budget. Okay,
The
thank
money
you.
is earmarked. We need to
Thank
finish
you.
that EA.
Great. Additional questions? Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. On a couple of things. One, on page 16, on the efficiencies, other efficiencies and savings, the energy efficiencies, those are entirely based on utility, reductions in utility usage or?
Yes, so for example, on the water side, we made investments in technology that the way we pump water around saves us, we pump it very strategically now. That saves us money. Using less air in wastewater treatment, in the aeration tanks, by managing the blowers better while still maintaining performance. Those are all efficiency measures.
So do you have any idea what percentage that is of your energy cost?
That 4 million out of 60 would be,
I can do the math in my head.
yeah.
Yeah. In previous years, we've seen an energy efficiency reduction as well, correct?
That's correct. Every year we look at that to see if we can tighten up our use. And as we complete investments, as I mentioned to Councillor Carroll earlier, as we change out some older equipment, it runs more efficiently, and we take that into account.
If I could recommend as part of, there's a graph in here showing the cost and total amounts of water at a third axis, and show your energy consumption, because I think in recent years, despite growing population, despite reducing water demand, I think your energy efficiency also.
We do have some key performance indicators that we track operationally that track that. Total kilowatt hours used, gains production volumes, et cetera. So we do have those metrics, and I can provide them to you. If you send me an email, we'll gladly give you that.
The line-by-line reductions, none of that is staff-related?
No.
Are there changes being proposed to the way that effluent in our system is being tracked?
Sorry.
By currently there's staff that address some of the effluent from industrial water users?
Oh, sorry, managing the industrial waste surcharge program?
Not just the surcharge, but also the pollution prevention plan.
And pollution, so my entire environmental monitoring protection group?
Yeah, does that change?
There are no changes there, no.
Perfect, thank you. There's council direction to look at incentives. I know they're not in your presentation. They're in the budget, though. There's recommendations around examining certain programs that would help improve commercial manufacturing and industrial competitiveness?
Yes, so there's a staff report that you will see in the package. We were asked in March, when we approved the 2019 budget, to provide a report to council, which we've done, assigned by myself and Michael Williams, the General Manager of Economic Development Culture. It lists a variety of things that we want to look at, so we're asking permission from council to do some consultation with a broader stakeholder group on a number of issues.
Okay, thank you very much. On page 8 of the report, it shows an increase in the breaks per 100 kilometers of water distribution pipe. State of good repair, changing climate. How can we account for that?
So water main break, the biggest determinant of water main breaks is our cold winter. So if we get into a time period where we see minus 20 for 5-6 weeks, the frost level drops significantly, and that's when we experience a year with quite a number of breaks. So what we try to do is normalize out that data, and we start looking at what is the base core data versus the number of kilometers that we have. So there's the analysis that we're working on to see if we're seeing that number drop, which intuitively we feel it is, but we still have to do some more analysis to pull out that data.
The inspections of watercourse inlets and outlets, the decrease from 2017, 2018 to 2019 is quite dramatic. That's like in the nature of 15%, in the range of 15-20%. Can you account for what may have changed from last year to this year with respect to us?
So that's just the projected. If you're looking at the 2019 number?
Yeah.
So that's our projected target. We haven't yet completed the year, and I don't know what that final number will come in at. As you can see, in other years, we exceeded our target. So we might come out ahead again once we tally up the 2019 year.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you. You have, I'm trying to find it, the graph that shows that total water consumption has gone down because of changes in
With population?
with population.
Yep.
Do you have a similar graph that shows storm water, wastewater treatment?
For wastewater treatment?
Yeah, for wastewater treatment to show, is that trend also going down, or is it going up because of the additional stormwater that is still coming into the mix?
So no, we haven't produced it, but it actually closely matches. So we have been seeing downward trends in total volume coming at our treatment plants, but there is where you see the fluctuations based on how wet the year is.
Right.
So if we see several large storm events, that will skew the average up because you'll have these spikes. So for example, at the Ashbridges Bay plant, when we get a big storm, the flow volumes can double or triple on us within hours, and we have to manage that flow. So all of that volume gets calculated. So if we have a really wet, rainy year, you're going to see that number creep up. It's the same thing. We have to normalize out the storms, see if we can see what are called the dry weather flows. That is truly the base that the people use. And there we've actually been seeing that going down over the last few years to match the water consumption number. We're starting to hit a line, though, where that's leveling out as well, which you would expect. As more people come in, you start to see more loading and more sewage coming to the plant. So that's why we think we're at that cusp. When we add all the data, that downward trend may start to level off a bit because the growth is starting to accelerate.
And then, can you just walk through, the city is trying to advance their efforts in upgrading the treatment facilities over the next 10 years? And can you just walk through the funding on that and where it's coming from?
On the wastewater side?
Yeah, on the wastewater side. So the commitment that there'll be no discharges into the lake.
I'll walk you through very quickly a couple slides. So the first one here, if we look at plants and facilities, you see that's the blue band here, and you see that rise sharply over the next few years and then tail off. The bulk of the investment here is upgrades in the wastewater treatment plants. There are investments going in our water treatment plants, just so we're clear, but the big dollars are going into our wastewater treatment plants. If we look at some specific projects on this slide here, so slide 30 and 31, we highlight some very specific projects. So in, for example, Ashbridges Bay, that's what the ABTP is, Ashbridges Bay Treatment Plant. The HTP is the Humber Treatment Plant. So these are upgrades to large treatment tanks that we have. So the secondary upgrades at Humber, significant part. That's the heart of the treatment process. We've been upgrading all of the inner workings of that. It hadn't been done since the plant, I think it was probably the early 90s, it hadn't been done. So we're changing that out. There's huge investments in Highland Creek. You'll see that as well. HCTP, a little lower. So that's the 2019. 2020, you'll see a continued investment in Ashbridges Bay, as well as Highland Creek. We have some large projects rolling out over the next few years at the Highland Creek plant.
So how do you track or report on performance then on that, and on that specific issue?
How the treatment performance?
Yeah, and specifically this issue of when there is so much stormwater flow that to prevent basement flooding, there are releases. Like, how are you reporting on that? And what
So we have to prepare, so we have to track daily information, and we have to provide that to the ministry on a monthly basis. So we have daily results of treatment performance throughout each of the plants. That gets submitted to the ministry on a monthly basis. And then every year we have to create an annual report, of which we post online on our website and make available to the public to see the treatment performance of each of our treatment plants.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any additional questions? We good? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. At this time, I think we'd like to move on to solid waste management, and we'll invite Matt Keller to come up and take us through the presentation.
It is solid waste?
Yeah.
Okay, this over there.
Perfect.
And there's a password in case they block the back.
Okay.
All right. First of all, I'd just like to thank my team in solid waste and FPD and PPF&A for all the work that they did to help put this budget together. It takes a lot of people, a lot of time, and a lot of effort to make sure that this gets done and gets done well. So I'd just like to thank everybody who helped put this together. So to start, we'll just go over what we'll talk about today. So there'll be a brief overview and highlights of solid waste management, the recommended operating budget capital plan, and then the adjustments to the rate. So solid waste management is an integrated system, meaning all of our parts work together. And when there's a change in one aspect, it impacts other components of the system. So as you see here with the loops that touch multiple service levels, if something happens in collections, it will impact processing. If something happens in residual management, it will affect city beautification. So it's a holistic system that each part in and of itself isn't separate, that they do link together. Solid waste management, we manage 7 transfer stations, 2 organics processing facilities, landfills, and over $700 million worth of capital assets. But what is seen by the residents? And here's a great example of what is actually seen from the work that we do every day. So the top left is after the Raptors parade. I know everybody had a great time there. The bottom left is after solid waste management had its turn at the same spot. So as you can see, it's nice and clean with the help from our amazing crew at Litter Operations. On the top right is our collection vehicles, and they collect the material that's put out every day by the residents of the City of Toronto. But what actually makes it work? In this slide, it's busy, there's a lot of pictures, and the reason behind that is because we are a very busy group, and we do a lot of things behind the scenes to make the work happen on the street. So we manage litter, we collect materials, we have organics processing, we're working on renewable natural gas, we have policy development, procurement, business services. I won't go through everything here, but every part of it is integral to making our system work. Some of the highlights from this year are we finally commissioned the Disco Road operating organics processing facility. We've installed our third fill station for compressed natural gas. We've developed, or we're developing, a single-use takeaway strategy, and we received multiple national and international awards. Overall, the program outcomes for solid waste are to safely and efficiently collect material from almost 900,000 homes, businesses, and public spaces. And to do this, we have to ensure that our fleet is safe and our staff is well-trained. The next outcome is to manage all the material that we collect at the curb and at our transfer station. So it's close to almost it's over 900,000 tons. And we do this by looking to effectively manage our contracts and seek value for money. We develop programs to ensure compliance with our approvals of compliance with the environment. And we're looking to maintain a sustainable rate model moving into the future and, of course, mitigate our greenhouse gas impacts. Finally, we look to maximize our resource value and the assets within the system, and by that we develop a very robust asset management plan. We study and implement different optimization and efficiency measures, and again, we're looking to generate natural gas, renewable natural gas, from the materials that we collect in our green bin system, as well as at our landfill operations. So some of the key service issues and risks for solid waste in the next year and the years to come are extended producer responsibility, the evolving trend in packaging, the sustainable utility rate, our organics processing capacity, landfill capacity constraints, health and safety, and of course being climate change resilient. So with extended producer responsibility, the challenge here is that the province announced a few months ago that we'll be moving to a full system where the producers will become accountable for 100% of the cost to manage the recyclable items put in the blue bin. What we don't know right now is what that system will look like, so there are potential impacts to the city. So we have a team that's been put together to address a lot of those impacts so we can inform council as we get informed by the province on the changes to the regulations that are being proposed. We've built in our budget a $15 million savings or funding from the province through the producers. In a way, in 2023, that's when we believe the EPR will be fully implemented. Hopefully, Toronto was first on the list in the municipalities and cities that get included, and we are pushing to be first. We are the biggest city in the province, and we'll be able to have a very big impact on the amount of materials that get put into the proper streams. So in order to mitigate the city's risk, we are also extending our collection contracts as well as our processing contracts in order to mitigate any contract break potential costs as well as any potential service disruptions. In terms of evolving packaging, there's changes right now being proposed by the provincial government, by the federal government, and the producers themselves. There's a lot of romance right now on getting rid of plastic and changing to other recyclable items and looking for items that can be recyclable. The challenge is just because it says recyclable doesn't mean it is, and just because it says it's compostable doesn't mean it is. But at the end of the day, the city is left holding that material and being tasked with managing it. So we need to make sure that whatever products are being communicated to residents as being green, as being recyclable, as being compostable, that the message is factual and true. The City of Toronto represents almost 10% of the Canadian population, so we need to make sure that we protect our own systems, but generally the systems with the other municipalities and cities in the country as well, because we're all fairly similar in the work that we do and the messages that are being put out. So on that, the organics capacity is a challenge within the City of Toronto. Right now, our internal capacity is 130,000 tons. We generate close to 160,000, 170,000 tons of organics every year. That number is projected to increase year over year. What we need to be able to develop is a new system, a third anaerobic digestion facility that can handle not just the increased demand, but any risk that comes from a potential shutdown at one of our existing facilities. As well, there's not enough capacity within the province of Ontario to manage the materials that are in our system right now. So we need to make sure that we have a robust facility and operating system to be able to handle all the growth in the compost and organics matter. In order to fund that, we need a sustainable utility rate. So what's been happening year over year is we've been dipping into the solid waste management reserve. In 2016, we had approximately $200 million worth of capital in our reserves, and in the past 3 years, that's dipped down to around $100 million. And so the challenge there is looking long-term, past the 10-year projections that we typically do, into 15 and 20 years, because that's when some of our major capital items are needed, but it takes 10 to 15 years to build these, so we need to make sure we have the commitments and the funding set aside and a good financial plan to make sure that we can fund it in a sustainable manner for our ratepayers. The next major risk for the city, but the industry in general, is the lack of landfill space within the province. So right now, regardless of the work that we do, we're looking at having a landfill, our Green Lane landfill, full in around 2034 to 2037, plus or minus a year or two. And it takes 10 to 15 years to site and get the required approvals to build a landfill. So we need to start that planning process now. We need to set aside funding for that now, and we've incorporated that into our budget. We also need to look at other measures, not just landfilling, energy from waste, and working with regional partners to ensure that the material at end of life is managed in the most appropriate and environmentally sustainable manner. In terms of health and safety, continued focus on that through the Vision Zero 2.0 and installing side guards and cameras on our equipment in order to make sure that our residents, our visitors, and our staff are healthy and accident-free. And finally, taking control of some of our climate change resiliency projects. So with our anaerobic digestion facility, we can add on systems that can turn that gas into renewable natural gas, put it into the pipelines and use it. It's a source of revenue. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that is also the same with our landfill. So the landfill also produces landfill gas, but that can be converted into renewable natural gas that can be used. So some of our key measures, again, the useful life of Green Lane, we have approximately 15 years right now at the facility based on the tonnages that currently come in. And I'll talk about in the presentation some measures that we can develop to limit some of the material that we do get in order to sustain the life of the landfill a little bit longer. Ultimately, one of the pieces that we've been communicating quite a lot on is our diversion rate, and in the 2026, there's a 2026 target that was built into the long-term waste management strategy that was adopted by Council in 2016 to hit a 70% diversion rate. That will not be achievable for the city, and that's not a bad thing. So the division's main focus is on reduce, reuse, then recycle. So we want to reduce the amount of material that comes into the system so we don't have to pay to process it, we don't have to pay to manage it. When we do manage it, we want to be able to recycle it. But with the volumes of material that we're seeing right now in our audits and in our garbage stream, we need around 150,000 tons of recycling and organics pulled out of the garbage bag, and there's only around 150,000 tons of that in the garbage bag. So we would have to get 100% compliance or more, which is not reasonable. The other challenge too is what we're seeing is light weighting. So before you'd get mayonnaise or peanut butter or your jams in glass jars that weigh more than now what they're in now, plastic. So diversion is one aspect. It's not the only aspect. So what we are going to develop over the next couple of years, again linking back to the strategy, are other key measures that really help us manage the material. And one of the most important ones is kilograms per person or kilograms per household, and the amount of material that actually ends up in the landfill. Because the challenge with diversion is you're measuring a lot of materials that don't go in, but we don't know all of them at the get-go. We do know what ends up in our landfill. The operating budget this year is based on the projections right now to our operating budget. We're looking at approximately a 3% increase in our budgeted to current projected costs, and that's the same both on our revenues and our expenses. As you can see here, the vast majority of our revenues comes from our user fees. Some comes from the provincial blue box system and our sale of blue box material. But for the most part, our key drivers within the solid waste system is inflation and volume. Those are the two pieces that drive the costs within our system. So the new and enhanced service that we're looking to implement this year is the onboarding of our renewable natural gas operations at Dufferin. We plan to have renewable natural gas put into the system in Q2 of 2020, but that will come at a cost of approximately $2.5 million. We are also looking to offset that with revenue of $2.5 million, so the net impact is zero. The next item is our climate change initiatives, which are expanding our renewable natural gas projects. But what that will require is 2 additional term staff to help manage those projects so we can get them completed. So as you can see here, when we look down at the projected 2021-2022 outlook, our costs are increasing generally by inflation, as I just mentioned. But the biggest impact that we see here is the net contribution to capital. So the amount that we're setting aside every year to go into our reserves is decreasing. And at the same time, the demands on that reserve are increasing. So the rate structure that we're proposing later on in the presentation has a gradual phase-in of a rate increase from where we were at last year of approximately 2.2% blended to a 3% blended in a couple of years in order to help sustain our reserves and fund future growth. On our capital budget, again, the outcomes are the exact same that we have in our operating because they are the outcomes of our entire division. But the priority actions that we have in capital now are to implement Council's vision or direction on Vision Zero, complete all of the state of good repair items that we need to address at our transfer stations, at our yards, and of course our landfills, and make sure that all legislative and health and safety requirements are addressed immediately. The next pieces are to build and commission the third AD. So a plan this year, and it's a multi-year project. It'll probably take 7 to 8 years to build and commission, but we need to start that planning process now. It wasn't envisioned in the long-term solid waste management strategy to be advanced this quick. We're actually advancing it 10 to 12 years sooner than what was provided 2 years ago. But the need and the risk assessment for that requires us to advance it. We're looking to develop and invest in renewable natural gas, continue to purchase compressed natural gas trucks. Those trucks can be fueled and run off of the renewable natural gas that we generate at our compost facilities, our AD facilities, and our landfill. So we can really close the loop. Or alternatively, we could fuel most of the city's buildings and other fleet that the city has with our renewable natural gas. And again, that goes down to maximizing our resources, making sure we get the best value out of everything that we manage, and using anaerobic digestion technology and renewable natural gas is a very key component now and moving into the future of the program. So as I mentioned, the organics processing capacity is a risk, a long-term risk, and we are addressing that in this year's budget by advancing some capital to move that forward faster than what was currently or previously planned. We are looking to develop, or we have developed, a sustainable rate model that allows us to build out for the next 10 years the requirements that we need for this 10-year window. We do, of course, have requirements in the 15 and 20-year window that will have to be funded within the 10-year window, and we'll address those in a bit. But one of the challenging pieces is we need to make sure that we set aside enough money to fund for some of those major capital items that are outside of the 10-year window. One of them being either a new landfill, an expanded landfill, or energy from waste. And of course, those items are going to be researched and brought forward to Council for debate and direction. But in order for us to be able to provide our best professional advice, we need to investigate everything and really come back to Council and then seek direction on those options. And finally, the risk on the climate change resiliency piece is the pricing strategies right now within the provincial and the federal government. They, as you know, are changing and trying to get a confirmed price per gigajoule or a carbon price or other pricing mechanisms for our environmental attributes will be key to ensuring that the investments will pay for themselves. And one of the most, I think the absolute most critical piece to move this program forward at our landfill is partnering with the 3 First Nations communities that are close to the landfill and really collaborating and making sure that we have a joint plan forward and work together collaboratively. So overall, as I mentioned, our asset value is $700 million. And over the next 10 years, we are looking to spend approximately $770 million on our existing assets to maintain them, to develop them, and then to build out new programming. And this is funded solely by the residents of the City of Toronto. We don't receive any provincial funding. We don't receive any funding from the federal government, and we hope to change that with some of the projects that we're moving forward with renewable natural gas and anaerobic digestion, that the provincial government and the federal government see them as great opportunities to invest in green energy, green technology, and invest in the City of Toronto and provide us some capital contributions in order to move these projects forward, or perhaps give us a very good rate on purchasing our renewable natural gas to fuel a lot of their buildings or their fleet as well as the City of Toronto. So I think it's a great opportunity to partner, and we will be reaching out to them in the future for those partnership opportunities. At the end of the day, the overall capital funding comes from the ratepayer, either in terms of reserve funding or in recoverable debt, and that's what's illustrated here on this slide. Here is the 10-year window of our capital program. It's been smoothed out over the 10-year window in order to manage our cash flow and our anticipated ability to deliver the projects. The biggest bump is in 2024, 25, and 26 on the top there, and that is from our growth-related projects of the third anaerobic digestion facility. So that's our major growth item that we're building into this year's capital plan. Our historic ability to deliver our capital program has been approximately 60% of our capital budget. And as you can see with the red line, that was the approved capital budget, and then below there is what we actually were able to deliver in those respective years. What we've done is we've really looked at our ability to deliver our capital projects this year, and our capital budget ask isn't like it was in 2017 or 18, well above 100 million. It's at $80 million this year, which comprises of approximately $50 to $55 million of new money for this year, but also around $25 to $30 million of carry forward money. And again, how is that funded? It's predominantly funded by the Waste Management Reserve, which is funded from the rate, as well as recoverable debt, which is the principal and interest payments are covered by the rate. So on the climate change resiliency projects that we're investing in this year in the capital budget, we're looking at approximately $130 million for the new anaerobic digestion facility and the RNG component to that, and another $50 million plus or minus for the landfill gas to renewable natural gas. the emissions benefits that we can see from this over time is, and this is very conservative, is that we can likely hit around 100,000 tons of CO2 per year once all of the 3 facilities are up and running. And what this will do in terms of our transformed TO targets of 2030, this represents 25% of that target. So these projects are critical to meeting the transformed TO targets. They're critical to improving our climate change profile, or climate profile, and our resiliency projects as well. And not just on the climate change resiliency piece too, but when we look at managing food differently, managing that material differently, and then managing our relationships with the First Nations communities in Toronto and outside near our landfill, it also builds into the resiliency of our overall program. With the recommended budget framework, our state of good repair backlog is fully funded. We are working very diligently this year to push out those projects. We're working hand in glove with PMMD and Mike Patchlock and his group and a number of other stakeholders within the city to see how we can do things differently to make sure that we get our capital spent. Our 2020 recommended rates are illustrated here. So the small bin, it would go up approximately $6. The medium bin, $8. The large bin, $10. The extra large bin, $12. So it's although when we look at the increase of approximately 2.5% on our rate, it equates to anywhere between $6 and $12 per year for a family or a home to have solid waste management collection, which I believe is a great deal, especially if you were to think of the time and effort it would take for you to take all that material yourself every week to the local transfer station, pay the tipping fee, and all the time that time is money it would take to make up the difference. So this is definitely a great deal for the residents. So we looked at our 10-year rate strategy in order to fund our 10-year program that we have right now, and it's based on the fact that we're looking at the province to fully implement EPR and those efficiencies be delivered to the city. Right now, we're looking at between $15 and $20 million as a kind of the bottom line efficiencies that we can expect starting in 2023, assuming that Toronto was the first municipality to transition. We've baked in our budget $15 million to be conservative. But if EPR does not happen, or if Toronto is transitioned late into the process, we will need to increase the rates in the outer years by 1% a year. So it won't be 3%. We're looking at a need for 4% in order to recover the $15 million gap that EPR would be able to deliver to the city. So what does this look like from a capital funding perspective and a reserve balance perspective? So as I mentioned before, in 2016, our reserve balances were close to $200 million, and now they're down to around $100 million. What we see here over time with our plan is the red bars indicate the money coming out of the reserve. So in the first 4 to 5 years, there's more money coming out of our capital reserve than going in. And because of that, the green line shows the balance in the reserve. So our reserve balance is dipping quite substantially, and that is not sustainable. We need a good, healthy reserve balance in order to fund long-term capital projects within the division. So the 3-year rate phase in the 10-year program will allow us, starting in 2024 approximately, the ability to fully fund our capital with the money that's coming in every year, so we don't have to draw on our reserve. And over time, in the 10-year plan, more money will be going into the reserve than the capital being drawn from it, which will hopefully help the health of our reserve, but also give us the ability to fund future investments within the program that we know will happen, like a new landfill, like energy from waste, and other programs that have been put in through the solid waste management long-term strategy. So to keep us honest and to make sure that we're fair, open, and transparent in what we do, we need to look beyond the 10-year window, knowing that it takes 8 years to develop a new anaerobic digestion facility or 10 to 15 years to develop a new landfill. We need to look beyond the 10-year scope in order to make sure we have funding, in order to make sure our rate is fair and equitable. And when we look at some of the pieces that are coming up, like I mentioned before, we we need a new landfill or an expanded landfill, one way or another, within a 15-year planning window. We're looking at mixed waste processing. That was approved in 2016 by Council unanimously through the long-term waste management strategy. That project has a requirement of approximately $310 million. No funding has been identified and no funding has been approved within the current program when the strategy was approved, and it's not built into our capital program right now. Staff are currently studying that just to understand the efficacy of it, what it can deliver, the benefits and the values behind it, and we will be returning to Council in 2020 with an update on that. So we didn't want to put anything into this year's budget anticipating that that project would happen or not, so we've left that discussion up until next year. And if the Council's direction is to move forward with that project, then we will amend our 2021 budget at that time to incorporate the funding of that $300 million project. So in order to ensure that we have, like I mentioned, a fair rate, it's adequately funding our reserves, and that residents and Council know what we're funding, we need to develop a longer-term rate model. And so we'll be developing that this year and likely into next year, depending on what comes from the EPR discussion with the province, what the regulations look like once they are drafted up and set. So there's lots of work to do on the financial aspect of solid waste moving forward. So I'd just like to say thank you to the committee for listening, and again, thank you to the team who helped put this together.
Thanks very much. I'd like to welcome Councillor Fletcher, who is with us now. Great to have you here. Going to open it up to questions. We'll start with the committee first. Is there Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. Just on the review of the mixed use, I thought we had decided we were going down the way of a dirty MRF. That was that ship had sailed. We were looking at construction. Is that not the case now?
So through you, Chair, to the Councillor, we are currently investigating that. So that was part of the long-term solid waste management strategy, was to review the efficacy of that project to make sure that it met the deliverables. And we have gone through a number of reports right now where we believe we can come back to Council in early to mid 2020 with a complete update on that project and get direction moving forward.
I was around at that point, and I thought that ship had sailed and it was more direction to go ahead and plan it. But I'll review the notes. I think we should all spend some time going back and making sure that that wasn't the case. Am I wrong? Wasn't the case? Okay. We have asked several times about how we might advance the anaerobic digesters faster, because we know the capacity might not be there to deal with the amount of organic waste if we actually succeed in diverting it from multi-unit residential, for instance. Is there any way of advancing that work? And I'm going to ask the same question about the RNG. It's such low-hanging fruit from a climate perspective, and it's such a good story. That's got to be one of the best things that is coming out of solid waste management right now. Is there any way, even if we increase the budget, could we realize the benefits of the RNG capture and the anaerobic digester faster?
I believe there's a possibility that can be done. The big challenge on the third AD is site selection. So we need to find a site. We're currently looking at our transfer station network right now to see if it can be placed at one of our larger yards without impacting our full transfer station capabilities. That, depending on the outcome of that, we may be able to move that quicker. But again, in the capital budget, the way it's structured is we have some ability to adjust our funding strategy to move it forward if that does come about. With the RNG file, we are moving that as fast as we can at Dufferin, so we should be producing renewable natural gas next year. We will be. And the Disco Road facility, we are currently in discussion right now with a service provider similar to the model that we used at Dufferin, and that should hopefully be up and running in 2022. But again, with the biggest impact that we will see is the landfill gas to renewable natural gas. And I think we're on a fairly realistic target right now with our dates. The challenge ultimately will be getting environmental approvals at that site, making sure we have good consultation and buy-in with our First Nations partners in and around that, our facility there, and that will drive our delivery date. So we could likely move that forward if we get consensus and buy-in quicker. What we've done is we've structured our team to have an outreach and stakeholder engagement manager who will work closely with the First Nations communities on trying to advance this project. But for those environmental approvals, I don't think more staff power would be able to get that done
Nope,
quick.
that's fair enough. I would take the opportunity to highlight just how critical this is in the city achieving our net zero target. And we can do this waste piece faster than I think we can do a lot of the transportation or building pieces. And it would be, I think, an enormous feather in the cap of our mayor, of our city, of yourself, representing the department, if we can achieve that just about as fast as we can. And it is given the potency of methane as a greenhouse gas, it's enormously beneficial to do this. The delays to the EPR, has that come at a cost to the city?
Yes.
Decreased landfill capacity?
So, well, the delays with EPR is transitioning from a shared system where we get up to 50% of our costs recovered. It's around 45%. If we move to full EPR, it will be 100% of those costs. So there is a delay every day that we don't transition because we're not getting either the funding or the efficiencies that could be.
Could you start work on calculating what that is in a dollar and cents, if it's reduced capacity in the landfill, if it's us extending a contract without going out for a full a full tender? Thank you very much. And also the costs of not being able to recycle more. It may actually be a cost to recycle more, but it would be useful to know that as a communications tool when we're talking to provincial colleagues in the media about why this is so important that it move ahead quickly, because it's been a lot of years in the making, and it's about time they moved on it. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Carroll.
Thanks. So we're not really getting there in terms of changing as much as we need to. We're not really getting to target in terms of diversion, and you have some goals in here. But I noticed that the community outreach job, manager of stakeholder and community outreach, is a job currently being posted. So what has been happening in year 2019? What are we doing in community outreach to raise in the condo and multi-res program and even single family, and to just raise the conversation in the community? Have we been doing much in 2019? And does a new program begin if this person is hired by the end of the year?
So we continue. We've always done outreach through communications, through our media piece with we have ambassador programs in the communities, working in condo buildings, working in multi-residential sectors. We have our outreach component. Some residents might not like the outreach when their bin gets rejected if it's full of garbage, but that is, again, a part of outreach and education. So we do work on our community outreach and engagement. The focus of this position is to consolidate some of that into one lead manager who can help really focus those efforts, as well as provide more focus on some of the outreach pieces that we have been missing in the past, which I firmly believe we haven't engaged with our Indigenous communities the way that we should. And hopefully this process will move us to more of a collaborative approach at our landfills, but also working within the boundaries of the city as well.
The Indigenous outreach is an important question. You have to achieve a consensus there in order for us to even proceed with the RNG project at Green Lane. I don't think it has happened, but I haven't been on Works for a while. But we really even opened that program at all by having some politicians come down and indicate to the bands, all of the bands involved, that yes, in fact, the conversation you're having with staff is on our behalf. We're fully committed to this. Has there been any conversation about that happening in order to get this next project to a consensus amongst them?
So the first step is to get council approval on moving forward with renewable natural gas at the landfill.
Okay.
We didn't want to go discuss these options with the communities, perhaps cause celebration or angst where council might not be in support of those programs. Once we get support of the renewable natural gas at the landfill, we will be reaching out to the chiefs of the 3 communities and structure that in a way that we can get as much consultation and buy-in. We'll be reaching out with Selena Young, our manager of Indigenous Affairs here at the city, and we'll do everything that we possibly can to make sure that this project will work for everybody.
Okay, so if you can break it out for me, how much are we investing in outreach and education overall? And am I hearing it right in the answers I've heard so far? That actually is now kind of a catch-all that includes also it also includes compliance outreach. So there's compliance outreach. There's also sort of stakeholder relations outreach to further projects, such as, you know, working with the band surrounding Green Lane, but also the education itself that is going to drive diversion amongst our customers. All of that is now in one pot. What's the overall investment, and how does it break down between those 3 pots?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the council, that's something I'd have to bring back in a briefing note for you, an itemized list, because a lot of those activities are embedded within collections, for instance, on the diversion planning on the curb. And what we'll do is we can get a cost for that. I know we spend close to or more than $3 million on our education and community outreach piece through communications and our team. But in order to give you the accurate number, I need to take that back and get that.
Okay. So I'm going to request that briefing note whenever we're allowed to request briefing notes. So might as well get started. Thank you.
Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you. For the EPR, what is the consultation process that is being undertaken, and how do we have a seat at the table in that?
So we went through a consultation process with a provincial advisor, David Lindsay, for I think it was probably 2 months, where his role was to try to get consensus between municipalities and industry and the provincial government. He put out his paper on what he believes is the best way forward for the provincial government. We were at the table. We lobbied very hard for the residents to ensure that collection stayed the same, the materials in the blue box stayed the same, and there was minimal to no disruption for the residents of Toronto, and our system base generally was consistent. And right now, the province is drafting draft regulations. We don't have a date when those are going to be released, and my understanding is once they're released, there will be a window, hopefully a very large and robust window for us to be able to consult on those, but the dates have not been provided to us yet.
And through that, as you say, you want to make sure that everything we have we're recycling right now, we can keep recycling right now. What is the highest standard? Who recycles the most in the province? Like the most things, not necessarily volume. I think we're obviously volume, but the most materials or types of materials.
So I don't know who recycles the most types of materials, but we're on the top of the list. But I don't have that answer, to be honest.
But maybe we can kind of look and preempt it, because I think what we want to make sure is that we're not going to the lowest common denominator, but we're rather going to the highest standard.
And that's what we've been pushing during our consultation.
But we don't know who that highest standard is right now.
We know items that other municipalities don't collect, and those are styrofoam and items like that. We want those in the system. We want them to be collected. We don't want a lower standard being applied to the province. We want everybody to meet that highest standard.
And for the outreach that needs to be done and for the Green Lane and for the natural gas, how does a municipality's engagement with First Nations differ? Like, what is our duty to consult responsibility? Because it typically rests with the Crown. So how are we interfacing with the Crown on this?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I don't know. We have an Indigenous Affairs office here that's led by Selena Young, and she will be the conduit for solid waste, and our team in any negotiations and discussions and consultations with First Nations communities, federal government, the province, in order to get the buy-in and the environmental approvals to move forward with this project.
And has our engagement strategy been developed yet?
No, it hasn't.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, I just want to talk about enforcement. So there are parts of the city and where people, residents, and some of these strip malls where you have residential at the top and retail, where they don't recycle, sorry, they don't recycle, they just throw their garbage out, that they put the recycling in the garbage bin, and it's constantly over and over again. How are we with, as far as enforcement and fines to these individuals that do it weekly, and we can't put all our enforcement out in certain areas to find these individuals? Are we finding them?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, the council, we're not opening bags at random and
No,
finding.
but so what are we doing then? The people that don't refuse to recycle and throw everything in a garbage bag or in a bin, and they're not doing it, and it's weekly, or should we not be finding them or doing
The challenge
something?
is going in and opening the bags, and
Yeah.
the amount of resources and in terms of enforcing that, we don't have at this point in time. What we push for is our communications, education.
Yeah, but-
in terms of opening bags on a daily basis, we can't get into that.
Well, I know it's very hard. So we just go out and on a complaint, we just pick up the garbage that's left on the sidewalk and that's it. We continue doing that. But at one point, I think we have to look at finding some of these businesses and individuals. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much. At this point, I'd like to move outside of committee. Councillor Fletcher, do you have any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you just give us some idea about future yards or the current yard that's in the south end? How many yards are there in the south, Toronto and East York
Through
area
you to
besides Bermondsey?
for solid waste or
Yes, solid waste,
the
yeah.
city in large.
No, yours.
We have
I
7
only want you to know about your yards.
We have 4 yards. We have Bermondsey, Yonge Street, Ellesmere, and it's slipping my mind.
Can't I stop it?
Booth.
And Booth Yards, yeah. So where are you at with any of the shifting of the Booth Yard? Have you been in conversations and what the cost might be or new locations of any kind?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, not at this time. I know
Not at
there's
this
an
time.
industrial modernization review taking place, but in terms of cost, benefits, who's moving where, I haven't been updated on that yet.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
So there's an industrial yards modernization project that's being undertaken right now through corporate, and we haven't been updated on any cost benefits, who's going to be moving where, if anyone's going to be moving at all.
Well, yeah, okay, that was set to be moved, but would you agree that there's a lot of solid waste in District 2 and 3? And they're having services, it's not a trick question, having proper service, do you need yards?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, yes, we need yards.
You need yards.
Yes.
So you're, and you kind of need yards where people are able to bring the waste close by, not halfway across the city.
So we need transfer stations where residents have easy access to them. If we reduce the number of transfer stations in our system, which I don't think is doable, but if we were able to, then there'd likely be a customer service impact to our residents. In terms of yards, what they do is they allow us to efficiently and actively deploy our equipment when needed throughout the city. If they were all staged in a certain area of the city, then it would be more costly, more greenhouse gas to move them throughout the city. So strategically staging yards is extremely critical for us, and I'd say most, if not all, divisions in the city.
I agree. So I'm following that one as you are. You have a new program now that you're going to be giving out grants. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what your budget is and how many people are there, what your budget is employee side, what your budget is grant-wise, and how many people are employed there?
So we have community grant program, and the vast majority of those are set, and I believe the budget's close to $2 million for that program. What we can do in order for you to see all of the community organizations that received funding or will receive funding, we can draft up a note for you or for the committee, just so that you are fully up to date on everybody that is getting funding, and that way we don't, I don't want to miss a couple here.
Right. And that community grant program, how big is your staff for that?
How big is our staff? So we have 1.5 to 2 dedicated people that work on that file, but the majority of the work is leveraged through our teams within the city, through multiple divisions. So we do use external services within the city to help us move those programs forward.
So on that note, that would be helpful to know. So you have, how many, you have a directly operated grant system, and then you use the city. What's the budget for that?
I believe it's close to $2 million for that entire program.
No, I'm asking, different city divisions do the granting for you. That's what I heard.
So SDF&A, they're in
Yes.
the community, they're developing programs. We work with them to develop certain initiatives within identified communities. What we can do is we can come back with a briefing note on the specific budgets in SDF&A, within solid waste, any IDCs that move back and forth between the
It's an
two.
IDC,
What we give,
interdivisional charge.
there you go, what we fund them and they fund us, yes.
Right, so the money's coming, starting with you, $2 million. It's meted out not necessarily through solid waste,
Correct.
it's others. So what I'm interested in, the component, the amount that solid waste is directly doing,
Okay.
and how many staff you have there.
Sure.
And what the reasoning is to not have, I mean, you said a little department, so I'm interested in that.
Sure. So the reason behind solid waste having staff is for us to be able to direct the solid waste component of the community grants aspect of our program. We are not economic developers. We don't work in SDF&A and have those connections. That's why we leverage those groups in order for them to advance these programs, but we'll get you whatever information you need.
Yeah, thank you. I won't take any more time.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Fletcher. Okay, are we okay on questions then? We're all good? All right. At this point, I'd like to recognize the CFO's internal audit process. As we know, prioritized the key divisions for us to hear from and review at committee today. That was water and solid waste. The budget notes are now posted online on the budget website. But I do want to point out and acknowledge that we do have Toronto Parking Authority here, our CEO, Robin Oliphant. If anyone has questions for TPA, we can bring them forward and you can ask those questions. If not, we can move forward.
Just if I could, given that we haven't had a chance to review the briefing notes, I don't want them to think they're going to be led off by not having any questions today, but I will have questions the next time, as I'm sure most
For sure.
of you will.
November 25th, we're all
Let's just make
there.
sure they come back.
Yeah. Is that okay? Perfect. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so with that, do we have any?
Motion to receive
Yeah,
presentation.
that's right, yeah. Okay, so we have a motion to receive the presentations and information from Councillor Layton. All in favor? Okay, that's it. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you on November 25th with all of your ideas, energy, and enthusiasm. Thanks very much.
I know. I got to spin the plug feed. I gotta spin the. It's in the analyst notes. It's not in there. It's in. Oh, come on! I've already tweeted out. I tweeted out. Are you kidding me? This one was all lined up. I tweeted out the analyst notes. Dude, the analyst notes got published while we were here. It wasn't in his presentation.
Did you just run out of this room like you was shot out of a cannon? I was going to ask him a question. Fled. Well, we don't really want to unpack it here, but there's a rumor afoot that part of the efficiency, which you described as something else, but part of the efficiency in Toronto Water is that we've taken the commercial